2, 1. This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest tonight is Scott Ritter. Many of you who have been watching this show for the last year, since February of last year, when Russia began its special military operation into Ukraine, Scott has been my go-to person as a military analyst discussing the progress of the special military operation in Ukraine. Tonight, I'm going to ask him about this advertised spring offensive by Ukraine, which is going to be a shock to the world, and the leaks that have just come out of Washington that is causing quite a bit of an international stir. But we're going to focus tonight on a part of Scott Ritter and his life that many of you may not know. Not only was he a weapons inspector of the INF Treaty, which Reagan and Gorbachev signed, he had been in the Soviet Union as a weapons inspector. And this is what most people don't know, is that Scott was also a weapons inspector in Iraq. And he resigned because in 1998, because the United States was undermining the inspection of the supposed weapons of mass destruction. And then we're going to talk about a book that Scott has written, and it's been recently translated into Russian. So I want to welcome tonight, again, a frequent guest on the show, Scott Ritter.
Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I think you've been on this show more than any other guest that I've had in the 3 years that I've been living here in Russia, in Crimea. So I very much appreciate your time, and I know how busy you are. Let's start, if you will, with this Ukrainian offensive. On the one hand, we're hearing that they're out of ammunition. They've lost over 300,000 dead, maybe another 100,000 wounded, and maybe 100,000 lost in action. Depending on who you talk to, these are the numbers people are throwing around. And then this leaked document or series of documents that just come out, some whistleblower apparently, that I'd like you to talk about as well. So Scott, tell me about it.
Well, I mean, the concept of a Ukrainian spring offensive is not new to anybody who's been following this issue. We've been talking about it. It goes back to the Ramstein contact groups meeting back in the fall, where Ukraine basically said we need 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, many hundred artillery pieces and ammunition. Basically, they need the equipment for an army, so they can launch this counteroffensive against Russia in the spring. And they pretty much straight up said it would probably be in the Zaporizhia region, and we're going to make a beeline for the Azov coast. We're going to try and cut off Crimea, cut the land bridge. And therefore, once we're positioned there, we'll be able to shell Crimea and bring the Russian population there into submission. I mean, it all sounds really cool on paper. And then a lot of money has been spent, providing Ukraine with this equipment. While they haven't gotten every tank they wanted, hundreds of tanks have been promised. Ukrainian crews are being trained on these tanks. So some of these tanks have actually arrived in Ukraine. So have the infantry fighting vehicles. So have the artillery. And so it looks like Ukraine was, in the process of building up a significant reserve between 6 to 12 brigades in strength that could provide the forces necessary for this kind of counteroffensive. The problem is nothing takes place in a vacuum. And, while this was taking place, there is also this big battle being fought in what I call the Soledar-Bakhmut complex. It's been ongoing since May. The primary fighting force has been the Wagner group, but they've been supported significantly by the Russian army, by paratroopers, motorized rifle battalions, volunteers, etc. But they've been in the process of grinding through the most heavily fortified, heavily defended territory on the planet. That is the Bakhmut-Soledar complex, trench line after trench line, fortification after fortification, above the ground, below the ground, everywhere. And this has become probably the significant battle of the conflict to date, and maybe history will show it to be the most important battle of the war, because the Ukrainians have made a decision to defend every square inch of the Bakhmut-Soledar complex, and the Russians, even though they're winning and pushing forward, it's a slow, grinding operation. It's cost Ukraine everything. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, has basically said that they have broken the back of the Ukrainian army in Bakhmut. They have killed tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, and Ukraine has been forced to expend its most critical reserves in this fight, including many of the troops that were earmarked for the spring offensive. In fact, right now there's talk within Ukraine that there will be no spring offensive, because the forces necessary for that are being used to hold on to Bakhmut, to prevent a Russian breakthrough in Bakhmut. And it's not just about the forces, it's also about artillery. There's critical shortage of artillery in Ukraine, and they expend a lot of artillery in the defense of the Bakhmut-Soledar complex. So all the artillery shells that were supposed to have been kept in reserve for this offensive are being used, and there's nothing to replace it. The United States has said the next shipment of artillery shells is the last one. We'd have nothing left to give, so it's make or break. And so I would be surprised if the Ukrainians were able to launch this counteroffensive. One of the things that these leaked documents showed is the woeful state of preparedness of the brigades that are being trained. And it also shows that, for instance, Ukraine is probably going to run out of their Soviet-era anti-air defenses sometime in May. Now, I don't imagine you can be very successful launching a counteroffensive if your anti-air umbrella has been stripped away and exposes you being interdicted by Russian air power. So the prospects of any counteroffensive are bleak. And if it does indeed happen, I think that you're going to find the Ukrainians will once again be slaughtered. The Russians have had significant time to prepare their defenses. They've prepared defenses in depth with sufficient firepower, with sufficient reserves, counterattacking forces. Whereas the Bakhmut-Soledar complex has been the death of the Ukrainian army. I'm not going to minimize the Russian casualties, but the Russian army has not been decisively engaged as of yet in the special military operation. There are significant reserves available for the Russians to respond to anything Ukraine is able to muster, and then to react, meaning that, if you study Russian military history and their doctrine, you understand the Russians are better on the counterattack than they are on the attack, meaning they will receive the enemy attack first and then thrust forward. And I think that's what we're going to see here. We're going to see the Ukrainians expend their reserves, expend their momentum, be halted, be killed, and then the Russians will counterattack.
Wow. Let me ask you this now, because it's been in the news every day now, and from a variety of sources, this leak from the Pentagon or the White House or someplace. What can you tell me about that, Scott? It's got me really totally confused. Is it real news? Is it fake news? What's your analysis?
I think it's real. I mean, I take a look at the documents. I take a look at the language, how it's written. I take a look at the classification markings. I think these are real. What I will say about it in terms of the substance, broad brush, you didn't learn anything new in here. I mean, everything I just told you about the Ukrainian offensive was something that could have been garnered from public statements made by the United States, Ukraine, and others over the course of time. We did get some tantalizing details about the preparedness, but again, that just corroborates any sound analysis of the situation. The same thing about ammunition, etc. But I think these are real documents, and it's total speculation as to why the person or persons who released these did so. But it appears that one of the purposes may be to provide data that contradicts the public optimism of American officials about the potential of a Ukrainian counteroffensive, in hopes to forestall it and thereby save lives of Ukrainian soldiers. But until which time the person is identified and, unfortunately for them, apprehended. We're not going to know this.
Do you think that the United States is looking for an off-ramp, a way to get out of Ukraine?
I think Seymour Hersh has discussed this, and I think I trust his sources. I think one of the reasons why the United States is pushing so hard for a spring of counteroffensive is that they recognize that there has to be an off-ramp, but they want the off-ramp to be done in terms favorable to Ukraine. So they're hopeful that the Ukrainians would be able to launch a counterattack that at least provides some semblance of success. Perhaps, I mean, they don't think they're going to recapture Crimea. They don't think they're going to expel the Russians from every place. But if the Ukrainians could, for instance, break through the Russian defenses and gain a foothold on the Sea of Azov, at that point in time, the United States then intervenes and says, okay, we want a ceasefire. We want this war to end now. The belief is that because they have the Russians on the back foot, that the Russians will accept terms and conditions that currently the Russians won't accept. So this is the thinking of the Americans, is that we need Ukraine to win before we sue for peace. I think that's just, it reflects zero knowledge and understanding of Russia, which is par for the course for the United States for the past several decades. Russia will never negotiate from a position of weakness. Anybody who's negotiated with the Russians understand that that's just a going-in proposition. And two, the notion that Ukraine could actually deliver such a blow is ludicrous. The leaked information demonstrates why. No air defense, no artillery rounds, ill-prepared units, and the ongoing meat grinder operation in Bakhmut. But I think that's the American off-ramp, and they're going to be struggling now because I think the reality is that the Ukrainians are not only going to fail at a counteroffensive, but the Russians are going to launch a response to that will result in even more Ukrainian territory being lost. And at that point in time, the United States will be compelled to seek peace with Russia even stronger, which is problematic for the United States politically here at home and in terms of our relationship with Europe. But it's going to be the reality. I mean, you got to play with the hand you're dealt. Right now, the United States, doesn't understand that this is the best hand they're going to get. Sue for peace now, along the terms set forth in Vladimir Putin's speech of February 21st. And that's the best deal you're going to get. If you continue to go forward, not only will you not put the Russians on their back foot, but the end result will be that Russia will take even more territory. And, that's up to the Russians to define. I'm not going to sit here and try and map that out, but I think common sense tells you where Russia would go and what Russia would take.
Wow. Thank you for that analysis, Scott. You're always so clear and understandable. I really appreciate it. You've helped me understand a great deal, and I'm living right next door to Ukraine. And of course, everybody here realizes what's going on. Crimea has been attacked and recently by some kind of a long-range missile and several times in the Sevastopol area from marine drones or unmanned aerial drones. So people are aware of it, but nobody's in panic. And I think people feel that Crimea and Sevastopol are probably one of the most places in the entire world. I certainly feel that way. All right, I want to move now to another subject, and it's something that we've never talked about on this show, and I'm not sure many people really know about it. I certainly didn't know a lot about it, but I've been reading your series entitled "The Making of an Activist," and it describes your role as a weapons inspector in Iraq. At the same time that the United States and Bush, and everybody will remember Colin Powell, we know that there's weapons of mass destruction there. I didn't know at the time and until recently that you were one of the weapons inspectors in Iraq. You even addressed the Iraqi parliament. I mean, my goodness, this is such a fascinating backstory. So I want to talk about this most recent installment, number 3, when you describe the efforts undertaken by Joe Biden and the Clinton administration to attack your credibility in the aftermath of your resignation in August of 1998. Scott, can you pick it up from there?
Sure. I mean, I resigned from the from my job as a weapons inspector, chief weapons inspector in Iraq. I had held that job since 1991, so for 7 years. And I don't mean to overplay it, but I was pretty young, but I was punching above my weight. I was running an international intelligence program, cooperating with the intelligence services of around the world, the CIA, NSA, DIA, that's in America, working with British GCHQ, working with MI6, working with the Israelis, Amman, Mossad, the Germans, the French, the Dutch, the Jordanian intelligence services. Pretty much, if you had your finger in the Iraq pot, I was your guy. I was your liaison with the United Nations. And then I gather this information, I assess this information. Then I played a big role in planning inspections, and it's not just planning inside UN headquarters, but again, taking the plans around the world to get support. So I would travel to Whitehall to brief the Foreign Commonwealth Office, brief the Prime Minister's office. I would travel down to Washington, D.C., brief State Department, the Pentagon, the White House. I would travel to France. I would travel to, again, everywhere to get everybody on board with inspections that were oftentimes very controversial. These were inspections that, again, not to overplay it too much, but it is what it is. Every time I took a team into Iraq, we had special operations people embedded whose job was to facilitate our rescue, meaning we anticipated being taken hostage by the Iraqis, and that there would be violent action undertaken by American Special Operations Forces to rescue us. And so we had to have people on the ground who had beacons to guide in the Special Operations Forces around whom we would gather so that when the rescue took place, they weren't searching for people, et cetera. I was brought into the weapons inspection process in 1991. The reason was because of my experience as a INF weapons inspector. We've talked about that, what I did in Russia. When I say I wrote the book on on-site inspection, I wrote the book on on-site inspection along with others. So when the United Nations was talking about creating an on-site inspection capability to go into Iraq, they needed people like me. And I was also an intelligence officer during the Gulf War. I played a very interesting role in hunting down Iraqi Scud missiles. And so I had a certain expertise on Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. So the combination of being an intelligence officer and somebody who knew on-site inspection made my resume attractive to the United Nations when, after the summer of 1991, it became clear the Iraqis were cheating. The Iraq did have massive quantities of weapons of mass destruction. They had an undeclared nuclear weapons program, an undeclared biological weapons program. They had failed to declare over 100 missiles and half a dozen launchers, and dozens of tons of chemical agent was not declared along with the weapons. And so we inspectors had to start hunting for them. That's why I was brought in. Originally, this was supposed to be a normal inspection process where the Iraqis declare what they have, and then we send in inspectors, real experts, who oversee this, account for it, and to dispose of it. Sort of a polite gentleman type process. But once the Iraqis began to lie, and not just lie, but physically confront the inspectors and block them, we had to make a decision on what to do. And the decision was to create our own intelligence capability. And I was brought in to head that up. And so I was an intelligence officer. And that's what I did. I would go around the world and coordinate with intelligence services, gather information, and then bring it back and turn it into a mission, a plan. Then travel around the world and get the whole world to line up with us and agree with us that this was indeed something worth doing. And then I would lead the teams into Iraq and execute the plan, gather more information, come back and start the cycle all over again. These were very confrontational inspections. These weren't, as I said, gentleman Jim type inspections for the most part. When I took a big team in, we were going to go to places the Iraqis didn't want us to go. And we oftentimes had to prepare for the potential of being taken hostage. So I had on my teams, special operations personnel who were, carried beacons. And these beacons would guide in special operations forces that were deployed across the border or sometimes in Iraq to rescue us if we were taken hostage. And the reason why I bring that up is that every inspection was a very tense thing. A lot of people you say weapons inspectors, and you think a bunch of guys in coats and ties going in and doing their little gentleman thing. Well, some of us wore coats and ties. I didn't. I was in jeans. But we went in, and when we drove up to a site, the Iraqis weren't expecting us. Guns would come out. Guns would be drawn. Sometimes I'd have a pistol to my head or a rifle to my head. We were told to stop, and then it became a very tense situation where you had to stare the Iraqis down and wait for the Security Council to rally around your cause and eventually either get into the site or be told to leave or die. And that's what we did for 7 years. And I took the job seriously, so seriously that when I took command of 75 to 100 inspectors from around the world, I didn't take what I was asking to do lightly, and therefore I held those who I was working for accountable for the job they'd given us to do. Remember what I told you. I didn't go into Iraq because I wanted to go into Iraq. I went into Iraq because the Security Council said there was a job to do. I had gathered intelligence information that said that there were things in Iraq relevant to our job. And then I ran around the world and I got all of the leadership of the world. I'm talking about the White House. I'm talking about, the Parliament of England. I'm talking about the Prime Minister. I'm talking about heads of state, and get them lined up behind what we're doing before I take the team in. So nobody was taken by surprise except the Iraqis. But in the summer of 1998, it became clear that the United States wasn't supporting this. And there was a specific piece of intelligence that had been provided by the British about the potential of ballistic missile components being hidden in a sensitive site in downtown Baghdad that served as the basis of an inspection team that I was leading. I put the team in August. There was a confrontation with the Iraqis. They kicked the inspectors out. And on the way out, I found out that it wasn't just the Iraqis that pulled the plug, but it was Madeleine Albright and Mr. Cohen, the Secretary of Defense. And they were colluding with my boss, Richard Butler, behind my back. And again, I took 75 inspectors into Iraq only to be betrayed by the people I was supposedly working for. So I resigned. I said, I can't operate like this. And that resignation set off a firestorm. And part of that firestorm was the need for me to testify before the United States Senate. And I did so.
I read that you made a presentation to the Iraqi parliament. When was that? Was that before you resigned, or could it have possibly been afterwards? Clarify that and then pick it up wherever you want to go.
Well, I start the series that you talked about, and you can find it on my Substack at scottritterx.com. Free, by the way. If you want to subscribe, you can, but if you don't, you can read it. No charge. I started off by talking about the lead up to the war and the case made by the United States. I talk about Colin Powell's presentation, but I begin the series of vignettes with my speech before the Iraqi parliament in September of 2002, a speech where I implored the Iraqi government to let weapons inspectors return or else face imminent destruction. And one of my great accomplishments in life is that because of this speech, 3 days later, the Iraqi government agreed to let weapons inspectors back in, and that opened the door for the potential of a peaceful resolution to this problem. Then I discuss how the United States conspired against that, and Colin Powell lied to the Security Council, and we ended up going to war nonetheless. So I start by pointing out that, but no, I was the first foreigner to address the Iraqi parliament. I was the only American to ever address the Iraqi parliament. And because of that address, I compelled the Iraqi government to listen, and I got audience with the highest levels of the Iraqi government, everybody but Saddam Hussein. And in the end, they promised to take the case to Saddam. And as I said, 3 days later, Saddam allowed the inspectors back in. So it was a big deal. But then I set it up by saying, people are going to say, well, how did you become this activist? Because were you always an activist? And my point in going back in time was no. At one point in time, I was just a Marine officer who didn't want the attention. Everything I did was in the shadows. I was not the guy that they brought out to the public. The one time that after the Iraqi government outed me and called me a CIA colonel and the most evil man on the planet, I had to go before a press conference. And I remember Charles Dulfer, the American deputy. At the time, I had been in Iraq a long time, so I had longer hair than this. It came over my ears and was curling the back. So I was going to go get a haircut. And he said, no, don't get a haircut. we want you to look as soft and squishy as possible before you go there. We want you to look like some sort of disaffected, academic. You need to cross your hands and not get too aggressive on these people and all that. So I had to go in and pretend to be just this long-haired hippie type guy. Hey man, everything's cool, not a big deal. And the press sort of fell for it at the time. But my job wasn't to be in front of the press, because what I was doing, including at the time going to Israel, and my trips to Israel were all secret. We had to go out of our way to disguise how I got there, who I was meeting with, et cetera, because we didn't want the Iraqis to know that we were cooperating with Israel. I had permission in the UN to do it. It was done with total, the U.S. government knew about it, but we didn't want the Iraqis to know about it. So, the last thing we wanted was the press to know my name and to be tracking me around. But when the Iraqis outed me, I had to make a presence before the press and try and say, look, this guy's harmless. He's just a little teddy bear with long hair. So we did that. But, I had to testify for the Senate. There's an infamous exchange with Joe Biden, who belittled me as Scotty boy and accused me of trying to punch above my weight. I wanted to get in, they wouldn't let me in, but people bigger than me had to make the decisions. Madeleine Albright, Mr. Cohen, that's why they get the limos, I don't, et cetera. But the point I was trying to make is that the people who were supposed to be testifying me that day were Madeleine Albright, Mr. Cohen. Why? Because the idea that I was trying to do something they weren't aware of is false. The point I was trying to make is they all had approved of this beforehand. They agreed that this was something to do, that they didn't know anything more than that. In fact, I was better informed on the issue than they were. Madeleine Albright famously said that I know nothing about American policy. With all due respect, Madeleine, I helped make American policy. In fact, because everything American policy was about was built around what I was doing. And then you stabbed me in the back, you stabbed the inspectors in the back, and you stabbed the entire process in the back, because the U.S. policy was never about disarming, but it was always about regime change. And my Senate testimony was very effective. And so then the Clinton administration made it their point to destroy me, destroy my credibility, attack me. And they began a process of smearing. They had me charged with espionage, again, because I was going to Israel. And I remind people that the espionage statutes, it carries the death penalty. So this isn't a trivial thing. And as a former Marine officer who has always served his country faithfully, to be charged with espionage and to be facing the death penalty for simply doing my job, a job that the CIA had approved of, by the way, but the idea was to break me. You see, by charging me with that, I can't get a job. I can't be employed. I can make no money. The idea was to destroy me morally, destroy me, in terms of fiscal reality, to make me go away, to make me disappear as a credible voice. But in the series, I talk about how that backfired on them. I had the opportunity to go to Aspen, Colorado, for instance. Teddy Forsman, who was a big, leveraged buyout guy. All of the companies he owned, he had stocked with, seated with high-level people on their boards, people like Henry Kissinger, Colin Powell, Sam Nunn, George Shultz. And so I was invited to this conference where I got to address these people and speak to them and have people of this caliber stand up and support me at the time when the U.S. government was trying to destroy me was a big plus. And so I just walked through that process of how I stood up to the efforts to destroy my character. The last part of this series will be published on Monday, and that will take us through to Operation Desert Fox and the ultimate betrayal, where the United States used the information I gathered as an inspector for the purposes of disarmament, instead to assassinate Saddam Hussein, and thereby forever destroyed the inspectors. And that's the lead up. You understand now why inspectors left. And now you go back to the beginning and see my trip to the Iraqi parliament and realize what I was trying to do and why it was critical that I was doing it. Because it was my intelligence that led to Operation Desert Fox, led to them trying to assassinate Saddam Hussein. And so to have the guy that all of Iraq viewed as Abu Azamat, the father of all crises, the most dangerous, evil man on the planet, go to Iraq, go before their parliament and say, you have to let the inspectors back in or else you'll be killed. I mean, that's a big deal. It was a big historic moment. A lot of people don't know about it because, I don't know. I mean, it's, we're 24 years later, but 25 years later, but it's part of history. And I think it's important that people know it.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I wanted to do this show tonight, because I just have recently become aware of this. I've got your book, and we're going to talk about your book, which has now been translated into Russian. But I never realized in the time that I've known you what an important role you've played, not only in the history of the United States, but the history of the planet. I think that you have done a tremendous service. And I have to ask you this because, you know, when the United States government goes after somebody, and you talked about how they tried to destroy your character, uh, they they uh, they accuse you of treason, which brings a penalty of death. They tried, Joe Biden especially, tried to embarrass you before this Senate subcommittee. I want to go back to that subcommittee hearing because there's a lot of interesting details there. The Republicans against the Democrats, and you weren't alone. I think you had some supporters. But were you ever afraid, to put the treason and the death penalty aside from it, were you ever afraid for your life?
From the U.S. government, no. Um, no. I mean, when I was a weapons inspector, every time I went into Iraq, I was afraid for my life because I knew what the heck we were getting ready to do, and I knew what the consequences were. I shielded my team from some of the things they didn't need to know, that a Delta Force team was over the horizon ready to come in. They just had to know that when I said move, they had to move when I told them to move, how I told them to move, and where I told them to move. Had they known what the heck was getting ready to happen, maybe they wouldn't have gone. But there were 3 attempts against my life in Iraq. One of them was ordered by Uday Hussein, the sadistic son of Saddam, who I had a interesting face-to-face confrontation with. Others, tried to shoot me while I was outside the intelligence headquarters, things of that nature. So yeah, it's I was a little nervous in Iraq sometimes, but speaking out, it wasn't that I was afraid of death. To be honest, that's the least thing to be afraid of because it's over. It's terminal. So why fear it? It's gonna happen or it's not. You just got to go forward and hope that you're prepared enough to avoid the potential pitfalls. The biggest fear is being a father and a husband to a wife and 1 daughters, and having her parents live with you and be responsible. So I had a family of 5 that were totally dependent upon me, and to have the U.S. government target you for destruction. And I'm not talking about physical destruction. I'm talking about economic destruction, the destruction of your reputation, etc. Again, if it's just me, water off a duck's back, baby. I mean, I'm a big boy. I can take care of it. But I got a family, and the family's looking to me, and I need to support my family. And that's why I write about it. I mean, the decision to resign from the United Nations, understand that I had a great job. I had a well-paying job. I was a person that had a good reputation. I could have, if I had resigned quietly or just walked away quietly, I could have gotten a job anywhere. Had I played the game, I could have been who knows what. There's plenty of opportunities put out there in my life. I've been asked to run for Congress. I could have been an official in the Pentagon or the CIA. There were many opportunities that were put out there had I just played the game. But I resigned on principle, and I took it upon myself to adhere to that principle throughout. And the fear was that in resigning, I was basically jumping off a cliff without a parachute. And it wasn't just going to be me hitting the bottom, but it was going to be my family hitting the bottom with me. And so this was a entire time all of this is happening. That's what was looming in the back of my mind was the consequences to my family. Me, what, the FBI is going to scare me? How? What are they going to do? Arrest me? Put me in jail? Been there, done that, guys. You can't scare me. I don't scare. I'm not afraid of you because I'm on the right side of history. I'm armed with reality. I'm armed with the facts. We want to put a gun against my head, pull the trigger? Feel free. You want to arrest me and put me in jail? Yeah, like I said, you did that. But when your family's on the line, that's totally different. That changes the equation totally because now you're powerless, because now you're helpless. And now the consequences are impacting those you love and you care for. And it's a huge problem. That's why I will never, ever, ever criticize people who say that's not for me. Because you know what? I'm being dead honest with you right now, Regis. Had I known the price that my family was going to have to pay from, as a result of the consequences of actions I believed I was doing in pursuit of a just cause. I can't honestly tell you today that I would have done it. Looking back on it, knowing the price that was paid, the costs, I can honestly tell you that I don't know what I would have done. I mean, I'm not Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg is a man of great courage. He's a man who, when confronted with the consequences of leaking the Pentagon papers, when they said, you could go to jail, he said, who wouldn't go to jail to stop a war? Well, me, maybe. I don't know. I mean, if it was put to me that stark. I mean, when I resigned, I thought I was doing the right thing. I was doing the right thing, but I didn't realize what was going to happen. I was naive, perhaps, as any, person of my age would be. I was 37 years old. I was naive into believing that your government would turn on you. I'm somebody who always supported my government, always supported the United States. And so I never thought for a second that while they might have a policy dispute with me, that they actually tried to destroy not only my life, but the life of my family. And so I'm just being straight up honest. I mean, I'm proud of everything I did, but for those people who say, oh, you're so brave, you're so courageous, not really. Had I known everything up front, I can't guarantee the outcome. I'd like to believe I'd do the right thing, but I can't guarantee that because it's a hell of a price to ask your family to pay, especially when you don't ask them because you don't know. It just happened. So, yeah, it's tough. And it's the same situation I face today. I mean, I did everything humanly possible to stop a war with Iraq, everything. I traveled to the Iraqi parliament at great risk, and spoke to them and put in motion things, things that should have stopped a war, but then my government didn't want to stop the war. And then to continue to speak out, to work on it, the government did everything they can to destroy me. And I mean everything they can to destroy me. And I've pulled through, but here I am in a situation again where, once again, I'm taking on the U.S. government about, the issues of Ukraine and disarmament and relations with Russia. And sometimes I just feel like it's deja vu all over again, it's and I just wonder if it's if the squeeze is if the juice is worth the squeeze. I mean, I'm trying to do something. Is there a chance of success? If there is, then yeah, let's do it. But it's an uphill struggle, and it's one that, as I said, it doesn't just come with a cost to me. I can handle that. It's the cost to my family that's the difficult thing.
Wow. This reads and sounds like an incredible spy thriller story. I can't wait for them to make the movie about this.
Well, we'll see.
And with you playing yourself, I don't think they need any actor. No. I don't know one personally who could replicate what you've done. I am really impressed, Scott, and I'm honored to know you, and really privileged to be able to share your story in my way. Now, I want to go back to the Senate hearing. You were grilled by Joe Biden, who is not a very popular dude right now. I'm one of the people that believe that Joe Biden and his cabal of mediocre, ignorant, so-called diplomats and advisors have the entire world on the brink of nuclear annihilation. So I don't have a lot of respect for Joe Biden, and I never did. But I find it fascinating, your account of your appearance before the Senate Joint Committee on Foreign Relations, or I forget exactly what the title was. You weren't all alone there. You had some people, senators, who were supporting you. So take me back to that and share with what you went through. I found it amazing.
Well, when I resigned in August, and I was almost immediately reached out to by the Senate, and they wanted to hold a hearing. And actually, the interesting thing is this is a unique hearing. I think it was the first time that the Senate Armed Forces Committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee met in joint session. And the idea was to have me, Madeleine Albright, and Richard Cohen testify. The administration said straight up that they're not going to allow Madeleine Albright and Richard Cohen to testify together with me because they knew what I knew. They knew I would eviscerate them, that they would be, their lies would be exposed. And so they withdrew. The Clinton administration also made it clear they didn't want me to be testifying. The last thing they wanted was to have me up there talking about this issue. And so their attack dogs were sent on me. And their chief attack dog is Joe Biden. I didn't know Joe Biden from Boo at that point in time. I mean, I knew he was a senator, but like I told you, my job was to do weapons inspections in Iraq, not play politics in the United States. And I made it clear that I wasn't too comfortable testifying before the Senate because I didn't want this issue to become turn into a partisan political issue. I wanted this to be about facts. And I was assured that this would be a fair hearing. Well, the Democrats tried to shut down the hearings. They did all the parliamentarian moves necessary to prevent this from happening. And Trent Lott, who was the Senate Majority Leader, did his own. And again, for the first time in history, in order to make my appearance happen, the Democrats refused to provide the unanimous consent necessary for this joint hearing to take place. And so as a result, Trent Lott just suspended the Senate, shut it down, and said, okay, now we don't need unanimous consent. We're just going to have the hearings. And so the Democrats were, they were outmaneuvered there. I didn't know this at the time because I'm just Mr. Naive weapons inspector. I was walked into the Senate by Trent Lott. And I didn't realize that was a declaration of war against Joe Biden. So I was walked into the Senate. Trent Lott shook my hand, and then I sat down, and he left. And he was basically telling his Republicans, here's our boy. Well, I didn't want to be the Republican boy. I just wanted to be the guy talking about weapons inspections. But that's why Joe Biden went on the attack, and he was vociferous on it. It failed, by the way. Yes, a lot of people came to my assistance. And again, I wasn't asking for it. Some of the people later on, I don't have any use for. John McCain came to my defense. Chuck Hagel, who I do like, came to my defense, and others. They came up and said, no, we need people talking about this, and we're grateful for you for the opportunity to talk about this. And most of the senators treated it as an opportunity to get information about a subject they didn't know anything about. But for Biden, it was war, and it backfired. There was a lot of public outcry about what he did. He was compelled to write a letter of apology that was published in the Washington Post, and then he invited me for a 45 one-on-one meeting in his office. And he wrote me a letter afterwards. I published that in the article, where he thanked me and said, if you ever want to talk about this, anytime. What's interesting is later on in 2000, the lead up to the election, Iraq was being bannered around by the Republicans and the Democrats as a potential casus belli, that the United States could go to war. And so I went to Washington, D.C., and I met with a variety of senators, Chuck Hagel, a Republican, and I tried to meet with John Kerry and Joe Biden. Kerry wouldn't meet. He was busy, but he said, hey, put it in writing, write it down. So I did. I wrote an article. It was published in Arms Control Today, and I brought that in. I called up Biden's office and said, hey, remember me? Guy you said, if you ever want to talk. Well, I want to talk. And Biden wouldn't meet with me, but he sent his chief of staff. And we met in a Senate building. It was a memorable meeting because he, rather than talk about this issue, he immediately attacked my patriotism. He called me a traitor. And I reminded the man, who was a little bit older than me, but still, you don't open your mouth if you're not willing to pay the consequences, that if he ever calls a Marine officer a traitor again to his face, that he'll lose all of his teeth and maybe his life. So I challenged him to do it once more time. And I'm dead serious. I looked him in the eyes and I said, do it, because I will kill you right now. And he backed down. He later acknowledged that he didn't mean to call me a traitor. And he also acknowledged that the information that I was putting out there was not classified. It was sensitive. It was embarrassing, but it wasn't classified, and I wasn't breaking any laws. And he also acknowledged that I was right factually, but that there was no way that Joe Biden was going to line up on the side of doing the right thing in Iraq during a presidential election period. He wasn't going to get ahead of Al Gore, who was Bill Clinton's vice president running for office at the time. And it's the same thing that Chuck Hagel told me in a meeting. I had a long meeting with Chuck Hagel, hour and 45 minutes. And he said, don't expect any profiling courage moments. That's the name of John F. Kennedy's book, by the way, that helped get him elected back in 1960. He said, don't expect any profile and courage moments from anybody in Congress during election season. We're not going to get ahead of our respective candidates. So the Iraq issue was left hanging. Then later in 2002, as we're getting ready for this war, I once again reached out to Joe Biden and tried to get him to hold a hearing. He at first said there was no need for a hearing. And then when he held the hearing, he excluded me from the hearing because it was a kangaroo court trying to make a case for war. And this is one of the reasons why I felt compelled to go to the Iraqi parliament, because I was watching what Joe Biden was doing in the United States Senate, realizing that he was leading us down a path for the inevitability of a Senate vote in favor of war. And the main argument he was using, that there's no UN weapons inspectors in Iraq, therefore we have to assume the worst. And if we assume the worst, therefore we have to go to war. So that's why I had to go to the Iraqi parliament and convince them to let weapons inspectors back in so that we could prevent us going to war based upon ignorance. I mean, if Iraq chose not to cooperate and all that kind of stuff, then war would be inevitable, but at least give peace a chance. And Iraq did. They allowed the inspectors in. The inspectors were given a list of 38 sites from the U.S. intelligence community. They said, we know these sites have weapons of mass destruction. The inspectors went in and investigated every site and found that there was nothing there. There never was anything there. The U.S. intelligence was wrong. That still wasn't good enough, and that led Colin Powell to his infamous briefing in February of 2003, where he falsified a case for war, lied about weapons of mass destruction, and in March, the United States invaded, and the rest is history.
I want to encourage people to go to Scott's website and to contribute. Scott has been so prolific in his articles and his appearances to almost everyone who asks him, he will appear on their program. This is a full-time job, and so I really want to encourage to support Scott. Go to his website, his Substack channel, and begin reading his information if you're not getting it already. Scott, with the time we have left, I want to talk about your book. I bought the Kindle version. You can't get hard copies of anything over here because of the sanctions. There is no mail going in or out. So I have the Kindle and I've started reading it. It's entitled Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika, Arms Control and the End of the Soviet Union. I want you to tell me, give us an overview of what the book is about, because this is basically your diary, your chronicle of being a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union. And I also want you to talk about the recent translation of this book into Russian. And I hope that this book will become very, very popular in the Russian Federation. Take it away, Scott.
Well, people need to understand that one of the things about arms control treaties, and this book is about the implementation of the first substantive arms reduction treaty. That's the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. It was signed by Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev in December of 1987, and implementation began on the 1st of July of 1988. A key aspect of this treaty is that all persons who participate in the treaty are bound not to you can't write about it or speak about it unless you get about anything you experienced on the soil of the other nation, unless you have their permission beforehand. This pretty much meant that there was no chance to tell this story because the treaty remained in force for many, many years. It wasn't until 2019 when Donald Trump withdrew from the treaty, and then the Russians withdrew, that provision no longer applied. And at that point in time, I was dealing with the deaths of two of my mentors, Colonel George Connell, a Marine, and Colonel Doug England, a soldier. These were the commanders of the inspection effort in Votkhinsk. And I just was like, I need to do something. I need to tell this story. And nobody knew about this story. It's an amazing story, but nobody knew about it because it was a story that wasn't allowed to be told. But I had all of the information, and people say, well, why did you keep that information? Colonel Connell, when I was there, he got me to write an article for the Marine Corps Gazette about our experience over there. And And that was the first time we ran into the issue of, you can't tell this story. Even though it's not classified, you can't tell the story. And then I wrote an article for Problems of Communism back in 1991 about defense conversion in Votkinsk. And again, I ran into a problem with pre-classification security review where people said, yeah, it's not classified, but you can't tell this story. So I had all this information sitting in my basement, and I wasn't allowed to tell the story. But now I was liberated. So I started to write this book back in 2019. And that's important to point out because I wrote this book as a history, straight up history. There was no larger cause associated with writing this book. I simply wanted to write a history of what we had experienced and put it into a context for the world to understand. I thought that this was important for my kids to know, for my family to know, for my friends to know, and anybody who wanted to read it to know. But I just felt it's imperative to put it down. This is, like I said, a story that was never told. The details that are in this book you can't get anywhere else, and you wouldn't get anywhere else except for the fact that this was published. And it's not just a story of my experiences, although it's told through the vehicle of my experience. It's the experience of everybody involved, both American and on the Soviet side. We talk about the Soviet experience. This is in the time of perestroika. So I frame it in the larger context of perestroika and arms control in general. Fascinating history. One of the things that I talk about in there is the transition from being a Cold Warrior into being somebody who has to sit down and work with Russians on a daily basis, people that I had been trained to kill, and I now have to work with them to accomplish the unaccomplishable, the impossible. This was literally a mission impossible, what we were asked to do in Votkinsk, but we got it done in cooperative fashion. So this is a story about that journey of going from a Cold Warrior to somebody who is working in a cooperative fashion with the Russians and learning about the Russian people and about their history, their culture, about their humanity. And so I wrote the book, and it was finished, sometime in 2021. And then this whole Ukraine crisis came up, and we see the end of disarmament. We see the relations between the U.S. and Russia go downhill, and it suddenly hit me that, oh my God, this is the 1980s all over again. Literally, what's happening today, the tension that we feel, was exactly the situation that existed in the lead up to the implementation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And I said, people right now are saying, well, there's no hope. We have no hope. Relations are bad. What can we do? And I'm like, no, we know what to do. We've done it. I wrote the book about it. I wrote the history of what to do. This is not just history, guys. This is a template of hope. Read this book and understand that we have solved this problem before. And all it requires for us to do is sit down with our Russian counterparts and deal with them as equals, as humans, work this problem through together. And we can solve this problem, but we can't because we have this wall of ignorance created by Russophobia, this fear, irrational fear of Russia that's derived from people not understanding Russia and unable and unwilling to put Russia in its proper context. The exact same thing we faced in the 1980s, same kind of ignorance. And so this book, I believe, is very important for the American people. But also what I'm finding out is that the Russians don't trust Americans anymore. One of the fundamental premises of the INF Treaty was trust but verify. And the Russians are like, we just don't trust you. And we don't think we ever can. So this isn't just about going to the American people and getting the American people to resolve the issue of Russophobia. This is about reaching out to the Russians and saying, we need your help. But in order to do that, we have to build a bridge. And I know maybe you don't want me to come over that bridge, but we need to start having this discussion, this dialogue, so that you can help me help America by understanding more about you. And the best way to do that was to take this book that I've written and see if I could get it published in Russia. And fortunately, I was able to get it in the hands of somebody who agreed with me. Komsomolskaya Pravda is publishing it. It's been translated by a team of linguists at Moscow State University, the best linguists they have, who sought to capture the nuance of the story. And it's being printed as we speak. And I'm going to be coming to Russia. That bridge I talked about, I'm going to be crossing over that bridge, and I'm coming to Russia at the end of this month. And I'll be spending pretty much the month of May traveling around Russia, talking about this book and talking about U.S.-Russian relations and trying to engender the kind of dialogue that that I think should happen. I liken this in some cases to the experience of Van Cliburn in 1958, where the American pianist who went to Moscow and participated in the Tchaikovsky Music Festival and got first place, and that triggered an awareness in both the United States and in the Soviet Union that we don't need to be enemies, that we have a shared humanity. And while I don't put myself on the same stage as Van Cliburn, one of the things I talk about is that we all need to discover our inner Van Cliburn. What that means is we all need to be able to take that journey and go forward and meet people and develop a human bond with people over in Russia. And the Russians, I encourage you to develop your inner Van Cliburn as well. Or some people say the inner Samantha Smith, and there was a Russian girl that came over and did the same thing. But the bottom line is we need to find that within ourselves that enables us to view these people that we currently fear or don't trust as humans, as fellow humans with a shared humanity and a shared goal and objective of living in a world free of the tyranny of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, you and I both have experienced that. You lived in the Soviet Union. You were working with people that you were trained in order to kill. But tell me a little bit, because I know you learned about Russian history, Russian culture, the Soviet period. How did the Soviets, Russians, whom you worked with, respond to you? And did these working relationships end up being personal, friendly relationships?
Well, understand that I went into the one of the reasons why I was picked for this job was that I had a Russian history background. I majored in Russian history, Russian military history, by the way, and I had 2 years of Russian language, but that was a sort of a mistake on the part of the Marine Corps because they put down on my resume 2 years college level Russian. And I always tried to remind people that I was playing football and drinking beer at the time. So my Russian language wasn't very good. I never claimed to be a linguist. And any Russian who ever met me knows that Scott Ritter doesn't speak Russian very well at all. I can make myself understood, and it's sort of entertaining when I speak Russian, but I'm definitely not fluent in the language. But I did have an appreciation for the history and for the culture of Russia before I even went there. And I have to tell you, when I landed in Moscow, for the first time in June of 1988, it was like opening up a fairy tale book, and just stepping off in every square inch. Because I had studied the Napoleon's campaigns in Russia. I'd studied the German campaign, the Battle for Moscow. As I came from Sheremetyevo, you go through Khimki and you see the monuments to the anti-tank mines. You realize this was the furthest advancement of the Germans as they moved in on Moscow. And then you see Red Square, the Kremlin, St. Basil's, you see it all, and you're just like, the history just is overwhelming. And that's what was fascinating about that. And then you go to Vodkinsk, and again, it was a denied area, but I'd studied the history of it. I understood its role in terms of defense industry. I understood, its own, it's just a fascinating history of the advancement of Russia in the area, Pugachev's rebellion, the Civil War, the role that Vodkinsk and Izhevsk played in the Civil War, and then what happened in World War II, where an entire factory was taken from Kiev and shipped by train to Vodkinsk, along with the factory workers and their families, and they were put up, and this became the foundation for the missile factory that existed today, that we were now inspecting their missiles. So I had an appreciation from the history, but the thing about being a good historian, and I don't mean good in terms of I can write PhD theses, I say good historian in terms of my appreciation for history, is it's your desire for more information is insatiable. And so my approach when I went to Vodkinsk, I wasn't there, I was there to do a job first. I think anybody who worked with me understood that I was very professional. I did my job very professional, but I was also a tourist. I was also somebody who was just going, wow, I'm here to learn. I'm here to, I want to ask questions. An interesting aside, I went to they had a public library in Vodkinsk, and it was run by the factory, as everything was. But I went there to check out books about the Russian Civil War in Vodkinsk to get, because I can go to a library here in the United States and get books, some Russian language books, but to be a chance to be in Vodkinsk, to get local histories about what happened during the war from a local perspective, that's a unique opportunity. So, I'd go there and check these books out and copy the pages. I don't know if I got in trouble for that, but I'd do it anyways. But again, I was just there to learn, and I think the Russians appreciated that. I mean, they really respected the fact that A, you were professional. That's the prerequisite. But B, that you had the intellectual curiosity to learn and to respect, not to come in from a position of superiority, but a position of equality and appreciate the culture, the history, the backgrounds of everybody involved. And so everybody I met, I had that kind of relationship with. We became friends. We weren't supposed to be, but we became friends. There's people I communicate to with this day. And I married one of those people. My wife was a translator at the factory, at the Vodkinsk factory. She worked for the Vodkinsk Machine Building Association, part of Department 162. And people say, "Oh, you fell in love in Russia." No, actually, no. We weren't allowed to fall in love. I think we fell in like, meaning that I had tremendous respect for her, and I think she had respect for me as well. But it just wasn't an environment conducive. I was married at the time, and I don't know. She wasn't married, but she's not the kind of person to go out and throw herself at people. She's a very conservative Soviet woman. It wasn't until later, when I got out of the Marine Corps and my other marriage dissolved because of the Marine Corps, that we were able to cross paths, and I convinced her to marry me. And here we are 31 years later and twin daughters. But, the fact of the matter is, because of the nature of the interaction between the Americans and the Soviets in Vodkinsk, friendships could develop, and indeed they are sustained to this day. And I think those are friendships that are based upon mutual respect and mutual admiration, and all of that is derived from the way that we presented ourselves in Vodkinsk.
What you just described about your personal journey of discovery of Russian history, Soviet history, getting to meet the people, your eyes being open. Wow, every corner you learned, you saw something different. And you talked about something that I think is really important. I think it's been one of the hallmarks of my life, is this intellectual curiosity, the desire to know and to meet people and to learn about different cultures. And what you said about coming to Russia now, or at the Soviet Union, if you come with that attitude of wanting to learn about a culture, coming with respect, coming as a person who is trying to promote the truth, to find the truth and promote it, and all in the service of peace and humanity. I think that message is something that you articulated very clearly, that I hope and I think will respond very emotionally and intellectually to a lot of people, beyond the scope of what you've contributed in terms of your book and the role in history you've played. Scott, I can't thank you enough. I felt privileged ever since you first came on my show a year ago, and I don't know how many times now, but now hearing this part of your story, I'm not only privileged, but I'm very honored to know you and to help tell your story.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the compliment, and I look forward to continuing to interact with you. And I have to tell you, Regis, I am really looking forward to this trip. I mean, it's I feel like I'm a school child again. Getting ready to go off on a grand adventure, because I'll be going to places in Russia that I've never been before, that I've read about, and and the historian in me is just like, oh my goodness, I'm going to actually get to go here and get to go there. The reason why I can't, I'll just be upfront with your audience. The reason why we're not talking about the specific, destinations and such is there's some concern after the Tatarsky assassination. I'm on the same list, the Mirotvorets list, and there's a concern that people could, may seek to do harm. And I have the utmost confidence in my Russian hosts, and then Russia's ability to make sure that nothing bad happens to either me or my daughter, who's going to be accompanying on this trip. This is another thing: the opportunity for a father to take his daughter on a trip like this and give her this experience. It's mind blowing as a father. But they've just asked that that I let them handle publicity and specifics of the destinations, so that they manage it from a security standpoint. And so I'm respecting that. But I have to tell you that at the end of each destination, I will be publishing a detailed article about that destination on my Substack, and so there will be this will be following me through, and I can tell everybody right now that when you see if I'm in your city and we have a chance to meet, I am reading everything I can read about your city right now, about your history, about your culture, about everything. I'm coming in armed to the hilt so that I can maximize this experience, and I don't take this opportunity lightly. I view this as literally a once in a lifetime opportunity. And Regis, as you know, when you get our age, and when we say once in a lifetime, we sort of mean it, because there won't be too many opportunities like this coming forward. And so I'm really, really grateful to Komsomolskaya Pravda for publishing the book. I'm grateful for my hosts for making this trip happen. And I'm grateful to the Russian people for being willing to allow a foreigner from a country that's openly hostile to you, allow me into your country and hopefully into your hearts.
Be welcomed here with open arms and open hearts. But I do want to correct you. You said when you get to be our age. I think I'm old enough to be your father, Scott.
Oh, no, I don't. I think you've underappreciated my advanced years there, Regis. Because if you're old enough to be my father, you'd have to be in your 80s. I don't think you're in your 80s.
I'm not far from that, Scott.
Really? Well, you're doing quite well. I hope that I look and act like you when I get to that point in life.
I have to tell you this. As soon as I find out the schedule, and I know that at some point it will be published here in Russia, I will go out of my way to meet you, not only shake your hand, but to give you a great big old bear hug.
Well, I appreciate it. But just a thing. I'm not a big vodka drinker, but I do like beer. And I understand that Russia has some pretty good wheat beer. There's a kind of beer called Tomsk. So if you can find an ice cold bottle of Tomsk, that would be cool.
You'll get whatever you want. And
okay.
And you may have to imbibe a little bit of vodka. I mean, there's going to be toasts that are going to be raised. The Russians toast everything, and you will be toasted. And
in more ways than one, apparently.
yeah. It really wouldn't be according to protocol for you to be toasting a group of Russians with a bottle of beer.
But I'm American.
All right. Thanks a lot, Scott. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Regis. Have a great day.